Tape number 6, Olga Berkovitz. Could you tell us where this picture was taken?
This picture was taken 1930, my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary in Nagyvárad.
Whose parents were these grandparents?
My mother's parents.
And what was their name?
Name Sternberg Ignaz and Sternberg Fanny. From left
From left to right?
from left to right is my sister Irma, my older sister Zelda, and
what happened, as you say each name, I'm going to ask you what happened. What happened to Irma?
Not Irma. Ilush, my third sister, is right under the flower, but they erased her because she was crying. It was her turn to stay with the grandparents, and she was very sad because my mother came back, was coming back, and she had to stay there taking care of them. And right there from left to is my mother, next to my is my grandmother holding one of her grandchild, and grandfather Sternberg Ignaz, and my cousin, and under the picture is my cousin Jula, who is living in Washington D.C. He's the sole survivor of the whole family. Next to him is Uncle Maurice, my favorite uncle, who was, and
why was he your favorite uncle?
He always was very nice to me. He threw me bread. I forgot to tell in Auschwitz also. Every day he was going through with the latrine, and he threw me bread. Uncle Jakob, under it is Frida, Maurice's wife, and Jakob's wife, and my grandfather, Sternberg Ignaz, and my favorite cousin, Shani, who survived the concentration camp but died after here in America, and Imma, my cousin, my grandmother is holding her.
Where was this picture taken?
This picture was taken in Nagyvárad in 1930. These are my parents, Samuel Savo and Serena. After the wedding, they were a young couple. It looks like they had no children then, yeah.
And where was it?
That was taken in Hansida. I see it's right by my house where we used to live. That's my mother picture, Hayasora. That's what she looked like about when they took her to concentration camp.
And where was this picture taken?
This was a passport picture. It must have been Paretjovifo. These are my father's parents, my grandparents from the father's side, Joseph Savo and Friday Savo. I named after my grandmother.
And where was this picture taken?
Hansida.
Do you have any idea what year?
No. These are my school pictures. I must have been 5th grade. One Jewish girl beside me, her name is Hasbishke. The rest of them I don't want to remember.
Where are you in this picture?
They're probably not around anymore.
Where are you in this picture?
I'm on the left, sitting down with a scarf or something. on my wearing a scarf.
And who is the other Jewish girl that you said?
Hasbushke.
Where is she in this
She
picture?
was one of my very good friend. She is the third one for me.
The third from the left?
Left, right.
And what happened to her after the war? Did she
She
survive?
survived. She just passed away 2 years ago. I visited her in Israel. This picture was taken 1948 in Bergen-Belsen, Israel Independence Day. My brother and I am in the middle, and on the right is my favorite cousin, Shani Sternberg, who he survived concentration camp, but since then he passed away in Los Angeles. This is our wedding pictures. Was in Windsor, Canada, in 1950, February 5th, to be Shvat.
And your husband's name?
Name is Avram, Abraham, and my name is Friday, Olga. This picture, family picture, was taken 1961 in Detroit, Michigan, just before we moved to Long Beach, New York. Leo Barry is about 5 years old. Mark is 7, and Leo is about 9.
And where are they in the picture?
Oh, Leo's on the top, Mark in the middle, like he's a poor middle child, and Barry is the sitting always with mommy and daddy. This is my Lagerschwesters. They always protected me and put life into me in a concentration camp, Mazaica, and money, and I'm in the middle, and Mani's husband on the left. And I visited them last year. I went to volunteer in Israel and also visited with them for 2 days.
Where in Israel?
Givatayim. She lives in, they live in Givatayim. This picture was taken 1966, October. I went to Israel to volunteer because main reason my husband always wanted to, we always was planning to go together, volunteer for Israel. We never made it. And I decided, and hopefully March next year I go back again and volunteer. This is the grave of Avram Yehezkel Leib in Beth Shemesh, Israel. I went for your site last year. And he always wanted to live in Israel. That was the main reason that I volunteered to go and work in Israel. And hope to go back again next year site. He passed away Erev Rosh Hashanah, 1965.
Wasn't it 95?
Oh, 95. Oh, my goodness. Oh.
Okay, so
My husband passed away in 1995, September, Erev Rosh Hashanah, and a year later, 1966, I went to Israel to volunteer. This is the picture of Dani's bar mitzvah. I think it was 1993, May 12, and why, March 12th, correct myself. And there is upper left is Leo, Mark, Miriam, Barry, and Helene, and David, Avram, my husband, and Donnie in the middle, and me, and Sarah. And lower down left is Joshua, who are they? Devorah, Rachel, Shira, and Aliza on the right. And it was a very happy occasion, and it was beautiful. We all was together, all the family. Mazel tov. And this is a Torah what we brought from Najvarad, and it was damaged. Bach paid thousands of dollars to fix it. And Donnie's carrying the Torah, and Zaidi is walking. We was marching from the house to the shul.
Which shul is this?
And Young Israel in Cleveland, whatever.
Mrs. Berkovitz, would you please introduce the people who were sitting next to you?
My
Start with your granddaughter.
my right is Sarah, my first grandchild, special.
And on your left?
My left is Aryeh, Leah, my son, my older son.
Aryeh,
son.
I have a question to ask you, Aryeh.
Sure.
What did it feel like for you growing up as a child of survivors?
Well, there's a lot to be said on that subject, and if you have a couple of days, I'd be glad to talk to you about it. However, I can mention a few things very briefly. Certain things come to mind. For example, I know that I recall growing up, I'm just trying to think of things that were different from an ordinary childhood, and actually not too many things come to mind. However, a few things stand out. For example, I remember that when I grew up, I would always hear dishes crash just out of nowhere. And I would go in the kitchen and see there would be something on the floor shattered, and my mother would be a little bit upset, and my father would come and say, "Don't worry about it, it's fine." I don't know if my mother mentioned it during the interview, but basically she was working on a machine that gave her electrical shocks, which caused her hands to automatically, she didn't always have control of her hands, so that the dishes would just drop. And to me, it just became an almost normal thing to hear dishes just drop at random and shatter, and that to me is a little bit different than normal. That with time went away, that the shattering of dishes. Another thing that comes to mind is I remember just my mother would be there, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she'd just break down in tears and cry and run to the bedroom. My father would follow her and comfort her. This was a normal thing for me. Of course, lately, or more lately, it did not occur, but I remember as a young child, that was quite frequent. And of course, looking back, I understand more now than then as to what was happening. With regard to my father of blessed memory, I remember also many things, but I'll just mention a few things here. And that is that I remember once I was just as a normal child would, just laying on the ground looking at clouds, which is quite normal. It was a bit of a cold day, so all of a sudden my father got very excited. So he told me to get up right away, and I didn't know what he was talking about, but I got up and then I asked him what was the problem, and he told me that he had seen people lie down on the ground and never get up. In other words, it was very cold where he was in forced labor, and people would just lie on the ground, and perhaps after a few hours, just lay stiff on the floor. In the morning, he would see them just cold, stiff, and dead. And of course, that didn't apply to my situation, but in his mind, it became similar. So that, again, was not exactly normal. Another thing that comes to mind regarding my father is that, well, just a small thing, which is actually quite normal, but is quite touching to me, and that is that I was about 5 years old in the playground, and it was about 1 or 11 o'clock or so later in the morning, and I was at yeshiva, and someone yelled at me at the playground, "Your father's here." So I ran to the fence where he was staying, and a look of love and admiration came from his eyes, and I just always remember that moment, because here I was just in the middle of a playground, and here was my father in the middle of the day just coming just to see me. And later on, looking back at that moment, I think about it, and I put myself in his shoes. He was working very hard as a physical laborer, as a plumber. He had started his work 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. So by the time he came to see me, he had put in almost a full day's work, and yet he was taking the time just in the middle, probably driving a long distance, just to see me. I still see his slightly soiled clothes and his beaming smile. And to me that also is quite a vivid memory. There are a few other things I want to add in addition to your question, if I may, at this point. Okay. Yeah, one thing that my mother. Yeah, one thing that my mother mentioned quite a lot is that the Germans treated us like animals, and that she always, and people that were with her refused to act like animals, even though they were treated like animals. And one story that always comes to mind, and I'm sure she mentioned it, is that when she was just in line there, that her uncle threw her some bread. And of course he didn't have what to eat, no one had what to eat, but the little that he did have, he threw to my mother, and someone yelled to my mother, "Look, your uncle is throwing you some bread." And to me this sort of tells me that yes, you know, my parents and my father, Olav Shalom, and the people that were with her were survivors in the sense that they overcome this most intense evil of mankind, perhaps the most evil we've ever experienced in history. Yet at the same time, they're more than just survivors, but I think winners. I took a martial arts class, and in this martial arts class, one of the things we were taught is, you know, if you take on the attitude of your enemy, you've begun to lose the battle. If you have your own attitude and you maintain it, you've begun to win. So my mother and her generation and my father, Olav Shalom, in my mind, are winners, in that they didn't take over the attitude. They refused to be like their enemy. They maintained their own attitude, and this to me is not just being a survivor; it's being a winner, and to me that's very important. So I don't think the name survivor is exactly quite appropriate. I think winner is perhaps much more appropriate.
How has this affected you in the way that you lead your life today?
Well, I just want to continue on the subject, and okay. So be able to meet the worst and to remain a loving and giving human being, and to be able to lose everything you have, your father, your mother, family, friends, neighbors, possessions, even your very clothes, everything of value in this world, and to go on and recreate their lives in a way that touches and elevates the hearts and souls of their family, friends, and fellow man. This to me is a great victory. And I think that's part of the real story here. It's a story of, really it's a question and a story. The question is, how do you go on after coming face to face with absolute evil? And I think it requires courage, but also more than just courage. I think it requires some sort of basic absolute trust in the future of mankind. And this comes after having experienced the depths of hell. And I think if you look around, you'll see that this strength is something that it's beyond me, certainly, And I think it's beyond most of us, the strength to somehow come out from, after, as I said, to meet the darkness of hell and somehow come out and recreate new life. And if you look around in this room, I think you see something very different than you might have expected. I mean, from a person who has experiences, you see not things of the past, but things of the future. You see grandchildren, positive experiences. You see basically things that speak of the future and not of the past.
I'd like to ask you, however, about you.
Just let me, one more thing here. These are posters of the future, and so this is a story not of surviving, but rather it's a story of a quiet victory. It's a very Jewish kind of victory of light over darkness. And after experiencing the very worst that mankind has to offer, the ability to retain, the ability to love, laugh, and live, and to create new life and new beginnings, that's a victory, and it's a victory that reaches the very gates of heaven. Now your question?
My question was, how did it affect you emotionally and how you have gone on with your life as an
Right.
adult?
Yeah, we talk and we experience and we know about this second generation phenomenon and the complexes involved. I think for me it was perhaps less relevant because I was fortunate in having parents that did not refuse to talk about their situation. In other words, I wasn't always concerned about what are my parents hiding because we talked about it. My mother was very open with her experiences, and so was my father. 10 years ago I taped my parents in a similar type of situation on this couch over here. And it's interesting that my father just sat and talked for about 6 hours straight at different tapings. But his speech was very chronological, and it was as if in his mind it was all outlined, because it went from 1, A, B, C, D, 2, and it went in strict chronological order, going over the most worst of possible experiences, but yet in his mind the story was there. And he was not a person who was speaking, he was not a very verbal type of person, but yet when we talked about these things he was kind of very open and gave us everything he had to give, whether it was verbally, emotionally, or otherwise. So my parents have always been very giving in every way that was necessary. So I was not feeling as if it affected me.
Effect can be for good or bad. I
Right.
mean, how does it?
Yeah, I think it comes down to who are your parents and what's your relationship with them. And I think that's a very individual thing. And in my case, I feel my parents gave me everything they had to give, and that was quite an abundance of much more than what I needed in terms of my emotional needs, physical needs, and intellectual needs. So I did not feel as if anything was being hidden, and quite the contrary, I felt that I was being given quite a gift to have my mother and my father of blessed memory as parents, and to still have my mother as my parent. Yes. And I must add two great brothers as well, Mark and Barry, who are not here but are with us here in spirit, and as well as my father, who is with us here in spirit as well.
And now Sarah is the oldest grandchild
First.
and the first. Tell us what you know about your grandmother and your grandfather, Alav Shalom, affected how you feel. And also, if you will, tell us something about your grandmother.
I just think that about them in general, my grandfather was a very caring person. My grandmother is very loving in everything she does for anybody. And I think that I mean,
It's hard for her.
I believe Sarah you did a tour of Europe and you went to Auschwitz this
Talk
last
about
summer.
that.
Can you tell anything about that and what you felt there?
I think when I went to Poland and Lithuania, I think it was very emotional for me, knowing that my grandparents went through it, all my relatives went through it. And I think it affected me more because a lot of the girls that were on the trip really didn't have that emotion, that personal emotion. That when I went there, I felt as if I was just seeing my grandparents there. and it affected me a lot personally, and I just felt like it just like affected me as if they were there, and it was very hard to comprehend what actually happened. Even with all the stories that they tell me, it's just impossible to comprehend what actually occurred. It was just, it's confusing.
Did you feel a change when you came back? Did you feel any difference when you finished the tour? In the way you felt
I was
before?
able to understand a lot more. Like, I was able to put a lot of things, like all the stories I heard, I was able to see, like from all the stories they had told me, I was able to visualize it more and actually see. I mean, there's nothing there now in Europe. I mean, you can't imagine it, but I was able, when I went into the camps, I was able to actually visualize and take the stories that, they had told me and actually visualize what that happening there as I was there, as opposed to just seeing, train tracks and barracks. I was actually able to feel the emotion there because I was taking it from my past and all the stories I heard from my memory and, putting it together in my mind.
How does it make you feel about being a Jew for the future? And what you're going to do?
It makes me feel very proud to be a Jew and to see what my grandparents went through and all the Jewish people that went through, that I'm able to carry on and actually continue to learn and grow and learn Torah and just carry on everything that they died for and everything that actually kept them to surviving, the ones that survived.
Thank you. And Grandma, would you like to add anything?
I'm proud of my children and my grandchildren, and that's our reward, and that's how we give back. It's what they call it, Jewish.
Jewish revenge.
Jewish Nakama.
You know.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, Aryeh?
Well, there's a lot to say, and much has been said and much will be said. Perhaps just a very, very tiny thing. Today there's a concert being given in New York about an hour or two from now. A klezmer band that's composed of East Germans who are not Jewish. I think if you look at it long term, what a Jewish victory consists of. In other words, today we have Jewish families continuing on Jewish tradition. We have Germans practicing Jewish tradition, or certainly our musical traditions. We've won, and we will win, because that's how a Jewish victory is accomplished. Not necessarily by physical, or nakama, or physical revenge, but by being who we are, by retaining our traditions and going forward, trying to preserve the past and look forward to the future and hold ourselves in the present in a very Jewish way, as Jewish as we can be. This is how we win our victories. These are Jewish victories, and that's what you see here, and that's what you've been seeing, and that's what you will see. And so we even have the East Germans singing our songs now. Or the West Germans now, or what kind of Germans they are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.